series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts.
Several shots were fired as President Kennedy's motorcade passed through downtown Dallas.
None of us will ever forget this day. Yet we go forward to defend freedom and all that is good and just in our world.
This is Houston. Say again, please. Houston, we've had a problem.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
I have a dream. My 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
Welcome to the Hagmann Daily Show, weekdays 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And now your hosts, Joe Hagmann and Jon Robberson.
Hello and welcome to this Friday, June 1st, 2018 edition of the Hagmann Daily Show. We are so glad to be here today. Can't believe how fast the month of May went. It just came and gone, but in the blink of an eye, and here we are in June. And that seems to be the case no matter what, especially up here in the northeast with these winters that seem so long, and then you have the summers that just go by in the blink of an eye. I wish the summers would drag as long as winter did, or I wish winter would at least catch up its pace to summer, or so it seems. As we know, it's the same amount of time, but it seems like complete stark differences, and that's probably because how crappy the weather is here half the year.
Oh, we seem to be in a bit of a weather conundrum. Happy Friday to you, Joe.
Yeah, happy Friday to you. Glad it's Friday. We both had some issues this morning, leaving us a little sour in the mouth, but here we are, and we're ready to go.
Yeah, long story short, system preferences, too many mics, and a computer ignoramus. That would be yours truly.
Hey, it happens. I want to just throw a few headlines out there. Then we're going to be joined by Carl, the part 2 of a piece we did last week of a dentist coming on to talk about a number of things from survival dentistry to the chemical bombardment we see today, and all things in between, holistic and natural medicine versus the opioid problem that we see. And this is going to be a great part 2. But first, just a few things I want to throw out there, because I'm not in the greatest mood, John, as you know, and there are just a few headlines that are just so ridiculous I have to get into them. That's the kind of attitude I have today. Starbucks training. Okay, so Starbucks again shut down their operations for 24 hours to do racial sensitivity training. Well, InfoWars has a very interesting report out. Starbucks training, employees forced to watch video after video of white cops attacking blacks. This is what Starbucks shut down to do? At one point, a girl at my table actually had to get up and leave because video after video they showed black people being assaulted by police, or black people being verbally assaulted by white police, being racially biased toward people of color. The young black Starbucks employee told a Philly magazine after being forced to take part in their racial sensitivity training course this week. I mean, what can you say about this?
It started with a bad cup of coffee. And that bad cup of coffee was $3. And then the bad cup of coffee became $5. And then they got drive-thrus, which in LA are hilarious because, I kid you not, Joe, 15 cars will be stacked up in the drive-thru. And you can park your car right in front of the front door, walk in, get your coffee, use the restroom, walk out, get back in your car, and they've moved one car through the drive-thru. It is hilarious. And a corporation is only as strong as its leadership. And clearly the people running Starbucks have cracked.
And this, what they did showing, first of all, some of these employees, I bet, are going to sue Starbucks. But this is not racial sensitivity training. If anything, this is causing more division, more anger, more hatred. This is the opposite of what they were tasked, or the mission that they set out to complete. This is the total opposite.
Joe, I am so tired of this foul move on the part of the left in this country to divide based on racial lines. At the end of the day, none of us are given a choice as to how we're born. It was by God's will that you and I were born in the United States, as opposed to being born in Brazil or Cambodia. So to divide based on race is just one of the most elementary pedestrian. It's a non-thinking issue, and I think Starbucks is going to face lawsuits. It's classic coming under sensitivity training of all things. I saw the articles this morning as well, and it's just to clue our listeners in. It's been a tough week. I was absent on Wednesday. I had some minor health issues. We've had a shift in the weather, and Joe, I don't know if you noticed yesterday and the day before the enormous amount of pollen blowing around in the wind here. There's these little kind of fur bunny things.
You haven't
everywhere.
seen nothing yet, John. Wait till it looks like it's snowing outside in some places because of that pollen. It gets real bad in the month of June.
Yeah, it's caused me to have a little bit of an extra rasp to my voice, and for that I apologize. But this segues nicely into our plan for today. Now, our guest who first joined us on Friday, May 25th.
And I'm calling him right now.
Perfect.
So you know.
Last week, his name is Carl, and he's actually, I need to make a correction. He is a pharmacist, and we will be joined by Dr. Travis Johnson next Friday, the dentist that you and I interviewed on the evening program approximately a month ago. He's a preparedness-minded individual, Ron Paul delegate, among many other things. So we are joined by the dentist next week, and that will conclude, Joe, the 3 Friday in a row effort that we're making to inform our listeners about what I think is one of the most critical and one of the most examined facets of being a preparedness-minded individual, and that is, of course, your health. You know, I think the average person who feels that they're sort of prepped up, they have basically an expanded boo-boo kit is what they've got, maybe a few extra Band-Aids and a few extra tubes and bottles of over-the-counter type things. But as the articles I was curating for today's show clearly indicate, 100 million Americans either suffering with diabetes or in pre-diabetic condition. The opioid crisis in this country, 33,000 dead in the year 2017, Joe. There are enormous issues that are facing us right now while, for all intents and purposes, the system, the big pharma system, is working on a day-by-day basis. Can you imagine what life would be like if there were even just a minor hiccup in the system, let alone a shutdown?
Yeah, and we talk about that all the time, and the ramifications that would have on the whole of society, and how people, for the majority of people, they are not prepared for that kind of reality, and they would not survive that kind of reality, and that would be very tragic. And we have to do the best we can to prepare for situations like that, and that's why it's great to have shows like these and to have guests like these. Carl, it's great to have you back on the show.
Hey, good afternoon. How you doing today?
Well, we're doing all right. As we were telling our audience, we both, John and I separately, had a little some issues this morning, making it a little frustrating to get through the day. But we're here, and we're glad to be here, and we're happy to have you.
Yep,
right, glad to be here.
Well, I just want to introduce you, Carl, with your bio for those who did not join us last Friday, May 25th, for our first program with you. Carl is a new friend of the show. He reached out to Joe and I through a really beautiful letter, having heard a program that Joe and I did approximately 2 months ago. The topics we covered, among other things, were medical marijuana and kratom. And Carl, who is a pharmacist and has been serving the people here on the East Coast. We're a little bit vague about exactly where he works. And as we get into the content of today's program, it'll be pretty apparent why we need to protect his identity a little bit. But Carl also served in the United States Navy in the 1980s as an electronics warfare specialist. And Carl, if we have a moment or two today, maybe toward the end of the show, I think our listeners would be curious about a moment or two of what you did serving in the Navy as well.
Sure,
but as we talked about in our show prep, we have an enormous addiction in this country. We are, I think you could argue that Americans have become addicted to the pharmacy. What say you?
Well, I'd have to agree with you on that. All you have to do is watch TV for a microsecond any given day, and all you see is drug ads. And I think the bigger side of that is when, excuse me, when you're looking at that, it's really gotten people to think in more of a compartmentalized way when it comes to their body and their health, because they think they can have one system in their body is maybe going completely haywire, and then but the rest is okay, and that's really not true. Everything's wired together, works together, and to simply keep you running in general. I mean, if you go in there and think, if you think, like say with the diagnosis of something like hypertension, folks will get going on their hypertension medicine, and long as that one little reading is okay, they think they're fine. But, the truth is, a lot of times hypertension is a sign of pre-diabetes. And diabetes is definitely something that you should avoid or try to avoid with everything you've got, because it's so devastating to you.
Carl, I'm so glad that you chose to lead with diabetes. This report from cdc.gov, dated July 18th, 2017, just under a year ago. New CDC report, more than 100 million Americans have diabetes or prediabetes. So here's my suggestion. When we visited last week, we talked about a lot of alternative herbal supplements and medications, and we can certainly cover some of that more extensively today. But my thoughts are moving toward some of the biggest problems that Americans are dealing with their health. Now, you're on the other side of the counter, day in, day out. Kind of enumerate for us, if you would, what are the 4 or 5 biggest issues that people are taking medication for daily?
Oh gosh, I think diabetes for sure, and you're seeing diabetes in younger and younger people, which is, to me, that's terrifying. These little children and very young people getting these diseases that, not going to treat them well over time. It really cuts your chances down. Hypertension is a big one. I think hypertension and diabetes are related. A lot of lung problems, asthma, COPD, things related to breathing problems. Breathing problems tend to also have a lot of allergy problems. And if you look on the over-the-counter section in any drugstore, you'll see some of the biggest stocked aisles are for pain, treatment of pain. So you've got your Tylenol-based, your ibuprofen-based stuff. Probably the next biggest section that I see on prescription and over-the-counter is stomach. There are a ton of GI system-related remedies out there. And, GI system is something that is one of those things where I tell people, if you have heartburn or something, you come in to pick something up that's over the counter to help. It might help you feel better for a little while, but the key to all of this is getting to the root cause of whatever the problem is. And from what I've seen over the years, a lot of the root cause ends up going back to your stomach. And then before your stomach, what you're putting in your mouth. So the food and the junk that we eat is basically killing us. So I've always told people, you know, if you want to keep paying your insurance company and keep paying your doctor and keep paying me here at the pharmacy, yeah, go ahead. But you can save money if you spend a little more time with the grocer, buy better food, adjust your lifestyle and habits.
You know,
And
Carl,
a lot of these things will go away for you.
that brings up a point that we would be remiss if we didn't tackle right now. Have you ever, I'm sure you have, but the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, why pair those two as a federal bureaucracy, the Food and Drug Administration? And I've heard some very powerful arguments over the past decade or so suggesting, and some of these suggestions are nefarious indeed, that the Monsanto GMO-based mega food industry that unfortunately most Americans survive on, and I'm using the term survive specifically because they're in effectively a state of malnourishment regularly, will lead you directly to the medications, many of which you just named, the diabetes medications, the hypertension medications, all of the issues with even with breathing. My goodness, I never heard of needing to have a machine and a mask on to breathe properly until about a decade ago. It seemed like it exploded across this country. So a start point, I guess, for this conversation would be to decrease your pharmacy budget. You need to increase your food budget and start eating real food once again. There are so many good books out there about how to properly nourish your body. And two of the things, Carl, that I took away from reading hundreds and hundreds of pages when the documentary Food Inc. came out in the mid-2000s, for example, and it became very popular for a couple of years, the organic movement and the farmers market movement. If you shop the periphery of the grocery store, that's where most of the real food can be found. The processed garbage is up and down the aisles. And my goodness, when you walk a grocery store these days, there are little tidbits and kibbles of plastic-looking stuff, one box and one package after another, you know, gummy this and super sour that. And it's not real. It's just colorful chemicals. Number one, shop the periphery of the store. And then number two, if your great grandma could not identify what you're about to eat, don't eat it.
Well, you're exactly right. And I watched Food Inc. maybe a few years ago on Netflix, and it'll really make you sick. But the connection, I think, with food and drug, you know, FDA, I think Hippocrates had, you know, let food be thy medicine. And I think there's a long-standing connection between food and medicine. For some reason, here we kind of disconnected from that idea. And, you know, it's really when you're talking about drugs too, it's worse than a lot of people realize, because a lot of medications, particularly medications that you're going to take on an everyday basis for something like diabetes, something like hypertension, stomach medicine. Those drugs, while your body is processing them out, it's also dragging some of your nutrition out with it. So I always recommend anybody who is on medication and they're, you know, thinking about decreasing or stopping them, or it's making them really feel bad. I think the first step, if you can't stop it or replace it with something else, is to basically go online and search drug-induced nutrient depletion, and you'll come up on some really good charts that will help guide you in what nutrients these drugs can potentially deplete from you. And it's a pretty long list of stuff. And, of course, the longer you take it, the more chance you're going to have. But when you're talking about replacing nutrition, minerals, and particularly and some of the vitamins, the main thing I really would stress people to look out for is absorbability. You're not really necessarily what you eat, you're what you absorb. So if you need to look for a reputable company that maybe can give you some extra information about, have they done absorption studies on these things, and particularly the minerals. Your average multivitamin with minerals you can go pull off the shelf is probably not going to be as good for you as you think. The minerals will probably be in there, but you're going to have a hard time absorbing them. Food sources are hands down going to be the best way to absorb minerals and vitamins. Vitamins, your body has a lot easier time getting it in through the GI tract and into the bloodstream, but minerals, it's a lot tougher because it has to do with particle size, and if it's in the plant, it's usually going to be attached to a plant protein, so it's already about as small a size as it can possibly be. So it's going to be available for your GI tract to be able to absorb it in, and that's what's going to do you the most good. So, first step one, replace them. Then it's how do you replace them. Step one in replacing them would be go to the food source. And in the food source you use, like you said, the periphery. And then if you can't do it that way, go to a supplement. And on a supplement, you just need to make sure that it's something that's going to be absorbable. Your best chance of a supplement being absorbed is either going to be with minerals anyway, as a colloidal form. They'll advertise it that way, or in a liquid.
Carl,
I think that's your best bet.
There's been an interesting debate that is fomenting. I'm looking at a website that was unfamiliar to me prior to this morning. It's overcomingyouranxiety.net. Mm-hmm. And I've been curious over the past year or so about GABA. And we're reading a lot more about GABA. Of course, GABA is a neurotransmitter. Mm-hmm. And it works, I believe, with the serotonin in your brain. And of course, when people are dealing with anxiety and or depression, that's typically either a serotonin-related issue and or a dopamine-related issue. And I know that GABA has become a popular topic, particularly among people who are dealing with some of the the depression and anxiety issues. But one of the big debates is the GABA that you can purchase from a health food store, is it absorbable? Can it pass through the blood-brain barrier? I have had what I consider very good success supplementing with GABA about a year and a half ago when I was in a very high-stress time in my life after leaving the film and television industry. And I used a expensive product. It was about $40 a bottle, and about a half teaspoon of this stuff. You could absolutely feel it working. And so this kind of raises an interesting question. We'll just use GABA momentarily as an example, but there's this constant information battle inherent to everything that we're going to talk about today, because there are different interests involved. You've got the drug companies who are going to, as you mentioned at the outset of your remarks, turn on Fox News at any hour of the day, and it's practically, the network is practically run by drug companies. Something that Joe's commented on numerous times over the last several years. 10, 15 years ago, they didn't have all these bizarre drug ads and commercials. Most of them you have to get a prescription for anyway. It's kind of a strange thing that's happened in advertising. But I digress. My point is that when we're looking at some of these topics, we've got the drug company, the drug manufacturer, then we've got the government, we've got the CDC, which most people believe is part of the government, but it's not. It's actually a private concern. We've got the law enforcement angle, the DEA. I think the biggest fight we see in that right now is, of course, revolving around kratom. But back to your initial point with the absorption factor. If we were going to start to put this puzzle together, it all starts in your gastrointestinal tract. Correct? I know that it's incredibly important to keep the proper bacterial levels in your stomach. I just recently had a significant amount of dental work done, and they put me on 2,000 milligrams of amoxicillin per day. It's a heavy dose of antibiotics. I am now taking a bacterial protocol to rebalance. So much of the problems that I guess would it be fair to say that what people are feeling in their minds, in many cases, is actually starting in the stomach. And you used a term, drug-induced nutrient depletion. I've never heard that before, but it seems to me that is the start point.
Yeah, the gut is just, if you think about how your gut is built, if you imagine the inside of from your stomach on down through your intestines, the tissue along the walls is folded, and it's so you can increase surface area inside basically this pipe. And then the pipe snakes its way, on out, starts at the mouth, comes out the other end. But if you think about your brain tissue is very similar to your gut. There's a lot of nerve connection, nervous system connection, all up and down your whole GI tract. It's a lot. Obviously, your brain is one big nerve center, as well as your spinal cord. So there's a lot of communication. And if you think about it, at least in my head, it makes a lot of sense when you look at the fact that a lot of the opiate-based pain medicines have significant gastrointestinal side effects. The biggest one that people have trouble with on that's going to be constipation, because it has slowed the muscle, I think it's called peristalsis. It's the muscular wave action that the GI tract use to move the nutrition through and then the waste out at the end. When you take opiates, you get basically the effects in the brain, which one of them is the pain, but it also can slow down. It dials everything down. Reaction times, feelings, stuff like that. But the gut is most definitely interrelated, and I think when you look at Food and Drug Administration, it's almost hard to separate the two, even though one's called a drug, the other one's not. But chemicals in food definitely have an effect on that. People tell you all the time, "Oh, I love to eat chocolate." Well, your brain has a lot of, basically, I think I call it a candy bar receptor in there, which gets into the neurotransmitter stuff you were just speaking about. And I'm not 100% sure about the whole low serotonin level, if that correlation to depression and anxiety related stuff has ever been really a 100% proven theory. I don't know if they found these chemicals that affected that level, and it's like, well, we need a theory to go with this or what. But I mean, it's not like Darwin evolution theory. It's a theory. That doesn't mean it's right. But I'm not 100% sure if the low serotonin level part of depression and anxiety is 100% known, because there's more than one neurotransmitter you're talking about. You got epinephrine, serotonin, GABA, all these other ones that have to work together. And if you get anything out of balance. But biggest thing with that too, it goes back to your gut. health and what you put in it is going to have the biggest effect on it.
Carl, let me ask you this. How much does physical activity and exercise have to do, okay, say you eat like crap, say, all the wrong things, but say you exercise constantly and you're burning off the calories, but obviously the nutrition is not there. You're still going to have the same problems as if you don't eat right and don't exercise. Would that be a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think so. I've noticed over the years that with people, like, they come in, one of the ways I got into really studying nutrition and herbal stuff was because people would ask me about this diet book they were reading, and I'm like, well, let me read it and I'll tell you what to think about it. So I ended up over the years, a long time, when I first started, reading a lot of diet books people brought me. And but I've also noticed in a lot of my customers and patients and stuff that the ones that do the best, it's really more diet related than exercise. As far as just general weight loss, general health, you get a lot more dramatic results and changes that you can measure and see and feel based on a regimen where you're watching what you eat. You're eating clean food, fresh food, stuff like that, versus, hey, I'm just going to join this gym membership. And if you're doing a gym and exercising hard, there's a lot of benefits to that, but there's also a lot of potential damage, because a lot of times people will go off half-cocked and they'll get this compulsion, man, I'm going to feel better when I exercise, which is true. A lot of people do feel better because it affects your neurotransmitters and you increase your circulation and whatnot, and you feel good. But you can also get a lot of injuries if you don't do it correctly. So I think if you're going to embark on any kind of diet, you should really think about it. Start off with a sensible way and, go slow and gradually change what you think about everything, and kind of look at food as more of a fuel source. And and then start the exercise, because you're going to want to get the most benefit of the exercise as well if you're going to spend the time doing that. And the way to get that benefit is through nutrition.
Well, that's why I asked, because people think there's a misconception out there that proper exercise substitutes any kind of other areas that you really need to take care of yourself, or that you can get away with consuming the things that aren't good for you. But it as you said, it's about the nutrition. It's about what you put in your mouth. I definitely believe, as you said, and I've heard others say it, about the connection between the stomach health and overall health, and it's definitely tied into depression and anxiety to some extent. I think some of that's also in the brain, but I do believe that if you feel better, if you're taking care of yourself, you're automatically going to have less of the anxiety. You're going to be less depressed because there are things that add to those conditions, and not taking care of yourself and not trying to be healthy definitely is one of them. So what would you recommend as far as, I don't know, what have you seen some of the most effective exercise and diet combinations? Are we talking, just some cardiovascular stuff with a decent diet? Do you recommend lifting weights, or is it an individual thing? Is it different for each person?
I think it's really more individualized when it comes. You get a nutrition, regimen going that you can do, and then the same with exercise. I think with exercise, as long as you're going to do it, that's probably the one you should do, as long as you're not injuring something. And also, when it comes to physical activity, I think the more, have a routine of everything in moderation, including moderation. So don't do the same exercise all the time. Maybe try to mix it up and get some variety, because a lot of people get bored with, like, hey, they'll say, oh, I'm doing a lot of push-ups or a lot of, jogging, but then I get bored and quit. I think if you have variety in your diet and variety in your exercise, in the long run, that's gonna get you the furthest down the road.
Yeah,
Go
ahead, John.
Sorry, Joe. Go ahead. Well, I was just thinking. We work, Joe, you and I, in a very high stress environment because we're the recipients of these data dumps of news every day, and I think that that what we do for a living has a significant potential for high stress and high anxiety. And I really appreciate what Carl said a moment ago. I believe he was quoting Hippocrates, let food be thy medicine. And, it's interesting to see how society, particularly here in America, is dealing with a faster paced, high stress. We live in the selfie society, if you will. So many people are running around basing their much of their self-esteem and how they feel day in and day out off something as irrelevant as getting thumbs up or likes on some social media platform. I'm looking at an article here from the Daily News. New York's first kava bar, Kava Sutra, opens in the East Village, serving sedative beverages. This has become a big trend in California and New York. People resorting to the use of the kava root, which I've tried. You can buy it at health food stores. It's very bitter. And just in Carl, in the articles I curated for today, it occurred to me that simply by having a curiosity about how the body mind function works and having a few extra bucks to spend at your local health food store or supplement store, you could actually, I think you can arguably almost make yourself strung out on herbal supplements. Consider the following. There's GABA. We talked about that for a moment. There's kava, valerian root, California poppy, St. John's wort, medical marijuana, kratom. The list goes on and on and on, and you don't need a prescription for any of those. And I would suggest that if you're using 5 or 6 of those different things a day, you could probably twist your neurochemistry just as badly or just as severely as you could with the prescription medications that you dispense.
Oh yeah, I mean, a lot of these herbal products, you need to not just think, oh, it's just an herb, like I'm putting pepper on my, whatever you're eating, to give it some spice. And that's, I think if you're looking at a big, some kind of extensive herbal regimen, you need to find out the reason why you're even looking at it in the first place. Because if you weren't looking at that, you'd be looking at a doctor's office and probably a handful of prescriptions he's getting you to write for you, and you would essentially be substituting one for the other. But there's got to be a root cause to why you're having whatever problem it is, and I think that is one area that Western medicine has gone away from. We had, I was trained at a medical college, and my professors taught me, they taught the dentists, and they taught the doctors, and basically told us all the same stuff. But a lot of Western medicine revolves around treatment. Treatment is not the same as curing somebody. And I always try to stimulate people to think that, they think they get in this mode that they can just take this and I'll be okay. They've compartmentalized the problem that they're having separate from their overall, health and well-being. And I think it's a dangerous thing to do. And whether you're doing that with drugs, treatment with the pharmaceutical drug, or an herb, you're still missing the point of you're not getting to necessarily the root cause of it. And it's like you said, then you're going to one store to get your medical marijuana, another store to buy this herb and that herb, and then going online to get this. But there's still a root cause that's making you need that herb. And I've always tried to stimulate people to think more holistically in general. And I think there's some doctors out there, and there's some other practices that are coming up now that are going towards that approach, because it's actually a lot more effective, and they get very strong, very long-lasting results that don't just go away when you stop doing the treatment. They recommend basically changing everything you do. So if you watch TV, you go to the grocery store and do all the things the advertisers tell you to do, you're just flat out not going to make it. It's just too much bad stuff in there. And, the other first step would be is when you're trying to get your health in line and not need to take anything, is quit putting in the bad stuff. Your body can, if you quit putting things in it that it's not going to help you, it'll clean itself out on its own to a big extent. And, just avoid that, or, it'll help you a whole lot. So that gets to the eating clean, eating better food. And I think as far as a health investment, that is really your best money spent on doing that, is with the diet, with the lifestyle. And then you can avoid the drugstore, the doctor, the insurance company, and even the herb store, because you won't even need that much of those at some point, hopefully. But you also got assault from the environment, trusting that the food is clean, you're not getting some kind of pesticide residue, or, the air's dirty, the water's got stuff in it. So we're definitely being bombarded from all angles right now. And you got to try to come up with the strategy to correct the problem, and then also defend against these kind of problems, and just do the best you can do with it.
Carl, let me ask you this. Somebody who, say, is in a bad pattern of behavior with not eating right, not exercising properly, what are some tips that you have, or that you've seen other people use, or have talked to them about, that have helped them get on the right track, whether it's, changing one meal a day, or anything that can help get people on the right track?
Well, usually if they would come up and start asking me about it, I could usually assume that it was pretty much their idea. That's the key. You can't get somebody to quit drinking too much or smoking too much if it's not their idea to do it.
Yeah.
So I think exactly what you said. I was like, try changing a few things, like even drinking extra water. But I'd always recommend people, like, look, if you're having trouble with weight and you're having trouble not feeling full, it's like drink a big glass of water before you sit down to eat. I think that a lot of the hunger people feel is actually a thirst. So maybe people are walking around half dehydrated a lot of times, and they're mistaking that sensation of thirst with hunger, so they go grab something sugary, put it in their mouth, and then you get a sugar high, which is affecting your neurotransmitters as well, and you just get on this roller coaster between sugar levels and thirst and mistaking it for hunger. But as far as getting started, number one is just get started. Make the decision to do it, and then try to spend a little time on your own, doing your own research. It's really hard to find an excuse not to do it these days when you carry the internet in your pocket and look up anything you want. But just getting started, take the first step. Then step number 2, you'll double what step number 1 was, and then after that, it's one step at a time. And it's going to get easier. And then also try to tell people that if you're trying to break a habit or form a habit, you need to kind of get in your head that you're going to need to commit to doing this new behavior or new regimen somewhere between 21 to 40 days. If you can stick it out that long, it's going to get significantly easier in whatever it is you're trying to do. For like exercise, if you can just make yourself do it and get to that 21-day milestone and then push through to that 40th day, most people can find that they can, in that amount of time, they can decide what they like to do and can do and what they want to try to do. And they're going to be more likely, and that's enough time to actually form a habit. And it's like any kind of physical training. A lot of it's repetition when you get to doing something without actually thinking about it. You're basically rewiring your brain, and it's kind of related to anxiety. Anxiety, I don't know a whole lot of details about it other than there's a lot of people studying it and trying to understand it, but that it does actually change your brain in some way that you can almost be wired to be anxious. And it's a pretty complicated situation. It's pretty debilitating for a lot of people too. So it's nothing to be, to take lightly. If somebody's got that problem, it's a pretty bad problem.
We need to be mindful as well that Scripture exhorts us to be anxious for nothing.
Over and over again. I mean,
direct.
Every time an angel showed up, the first thing they'd have to tell whoever they were appearing to is, don't be afraid. I mean, I would freak out. I think if one came up to me, I don't know, I would freak out. But I mean, it's true. If you have to have a healthy fear of the Lord, and beyond that, nothing else. And I think, society and that industrial government, relationship between all these things that are fighting us and have really pushed us into this state of constant fear, fight or flight type modes of walking around every day. And it's really, you're right. The Bible says you don't need to be like that. And I guess we can't try to convince more people to read the book, I guess.
Well, we talk about this on the Daily Show a lot. The respite, the spiritual and physical, but I think it's defined spiritually, the respite that our country was given undeservedly, in my opinion, in the presidency of Donald Trump. I cannot imagine what day-to-day life would be like if we had Hillary Rodham Clinton as president of the United States. And there's rarely a day that passes that we don't remind our listeners on the Daily Show to use this time to great advantage. And I think that this conversation today is particularly applicable because go to any Walmart, go to any CVS, and in some cases the line at the pharmacy is the longest line in the store. And I would imagine a great portion of a big chain store like a Walmart or a CVS, their gross receipts probably the pharmaceuticals, I would imagine, count for a lot of it. So we're in a time, at least for the next couple of years, respectively, where I think that God has given us an opportunity to get ourselves well positioned for some eventualities that are coming that may be very difficult for average Americans. The one that always comes to mind for me is the economic certainty that eventually we're going to have a problem with the way that we conduct our day-to-day lives through commerce. And I really appreciate the holistic approach that you've been sharing with us today. Let's go full circle, if you would, back to diabetes. I was staggered when I read this article today. 100 million Americans, so basically a third of the country, is either diabetic or pre-diabetic. Now, I have very limited understanding of what types of bad habits people do that brings on diabetes. I know that there's two types, and I know that there are certain dietary issues or excessive alcohol use that can bring on diabetes. But what are some of the things that our listeners can do, Carl, to keep themselves off that list and maybe keep themselves from having to come visit somebody like yourself once a week?
I think the biggest word that you need to avoid is carbs, carbohydrates, sugar, processed sugar. Anything like sugar is in everything. Without a doubt, that is the number one thing that you need to avoid. And grain bases, I've read a lot of stuff about diabetes. I mean, diabetes, a doctor or pharmacist, you can make a career out of diabetics, unfortunately, because it's just such a devastating thing to have. There's a lot of baggage potentially that you can have come along with it. But they're called islet cells in your pancreas, secrete this insulin, and it starts out, you are getting a high, basically blood sugar level or leptin level, and it's stimulating your body to release more insulin. More insulin comes in, the cell receptors that would use insulin to burn the fuel, the glucose and sugars in the blood, due to exposure to insulin, too much insulin, because there's too much sugar, it makes them stop working as well. And then you've got the snowball rolling down the hill effect. And you just end up with potentially devastating problems when you become diabetic and your body can't control it. So it's this holistic idea of stop putting in the bad stuff. And in this case, it's mainly sugar. And the faster the sugar can be absorbed and get into your bloodstream, usually the higher the insulin spike is going to be. So a high spike in insulin, your body's saying, hey, we need a bunch of insulin. It dumps it in. It cleans that sugar up, helps your cells absorb it in and start using it as fuel. And then all of a sudden you have this extra insulin running around, and then your sugar level goes down. So you have a sugar crash. So you get this yo-yoing effect, and that affects your appetite, and then that'll stimulate to eat more. And it's just a bad thing to get into if you start having any kind of signs of pre-diabetes at all. The hip to waist ratio is something you need to watch. Your body mass index is a good indicator. If you can watch those two things, pay attention to when you're getting hungry relative to what you're eating and what you're eating. Or you start becoming hypertensive or even pre-hypertensive. Those are warning signs that diabetes could possibly be on the way. And if you can catch those things early, that is the key to avoiding it. There's also, I'm sure, a strong genetic factor involved. But if you have had a family history of diabetes and you know there is possibly a trigger in there, genetic trigger in there, just don't pull the trigger. Do everything you can to not squeeze that trigger and set that round off, because it is a road you definitely want to avoid going down, because it can cause blindness. I think it's the number one cause of blindness. kidney failure. Then you end up in dialysis 3 or 4 days a week. Amputation, number one cause of extremity amputation, from the toes on up. So it's something to take seriously, and it goes back to what you're putting in your mouth. Sugar and carbohydrates, so breads and stuff like that. Anything sweetened, you just really need to watch out for it. And I've seen people coming off of sugar. I mean, that's almost a withdrawal symptom. So how can you say sugar's not a drug if you're jonesing for sugar? It's a back to that FDA, food and drug. They are related. And try cutting out sugar if you're hooked on sugar, and see how you feel after a couple of days. You're going to be cranky. So
yeah.
It's a big deal, and I think if people could just get to the idea where thinking that, hey, it's just not normal to need to take anything. If you do take anything, and look for the nutrient depletion, and just do your own research and think more holistically, you're going to get the absolute 100% better results than just going to get this individual problem fixed, and then this problem comes up, so now I got to fix that. It's all related.
Well, Carl, I want to thank you so much for coming on. We're just about out of time. We only have about 2 minutes left, and very insightful, and we do appreciate the information, and I think everybody can take a piece of what we talked about today and incorporate it into their lives if they haven't already, to try to make not only the conditions right so you feel better, but also that you live longer. I just want to say this. There's a very troubling story that I've been emailing with my dad about off air here, and we're going to be talking about this tonight. Huffington Post doxes pro-Trump writer, gets her husband fired, now targeting brother, all because she's an outspoken conservative on Twitter. Her name is Amy Meck, and this article is from the Gateway Pundit. There was one up yesterday detailing the horrific story that this woman and her family have gone through, but she's an outspoken critic of radical Islam, and this Huffington Post writer, Luke O'Brien, discovered Amy's true identity and began harassing her husband, her family, her neighbors, her friends. Her husband has since been fired directly due to the harassment by this reporter, O'Brien, and now he is calling on others to harass her brother and her brother's business so they go out of business. This is getting crazy, and we're going to talk about what this means and what we can do about this type of atmosphere and climate in our regular lives for people who are, not in the media and suffering this kind of oppression at the hands of these lunatic liberals and their rabid supporters. But that's a very troubling story, John. And you got an email in your inbox too about a potential change in the schedule tonight, if we can arrange it in order to cover this with somebody who would be better versed to talk about this. But that is on our radar, as well as a number of other things, and as well as our sponsor, simplycleanfoods.net. Hey, there's no better way to start a nutritional diet or prepare yourself for having the right nutrients in case the supply lines run out or you suffer from some kind of localized emergency that puts you out of the ability to get food for any length of time. Simplycleanfoods.net, promo code SimplyClean, GMO-free foods, veteran and Christian owned, one ingredient per food. It's not processed. It's completely organic. So make sure you check that out. It's been a great week. We'll be back with the Hagmann Report tonight at 7 p.m. and then we will be back on Monday. Also, we did a show yesterday. I just didn't upload it to Global Star. So go to Blog Talk if you want to hear it. Have a great day.
The Hagmann Daily Show is brought to you by the Hagmann Report. Tune in to the Hagmann Report weekdays, 7 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time. For more information, go to HagmannReport.com. That's HagmannReport.com.